My name is James Lambo, and this is my father's work, Donald Lambo. And he was born in 1921. He came from Amsterdam, New York. I asked him once, what made you want to be an artist? And he said that he had found a tube of paint in a playground and brought it home when he was a young boy. And he started to play with it, and his mother saw that he was actually doing some good work with it, so she bought him some more colors. And from there, he knew that he wanted to be an artist for the rest of his life. When he graduated high school, he went to Pratt Institute. He did a 3-year program at Pratt, and then when he graduated in 1942, he was swept up into the war effort. He was drafted, and he spent the next 3 years in the military. He became a fighter pilot, but he never saw any action. He was getting ready to be shipped out to the South Pacific in 1945, but then the war ended. So he was discharged. At that time, Pratt had for the GIs coming home, they had a program that they could come in and get a refresher course in art. Now, my mom's work over here, she also liked to draw a great deal, she said, as a young girl, but she didn't necessarily think that she could be an artist. So she became a secretary. She learned how to type. She could take dictation. And when she graduated from high school in 1942, she also got swept up into the war effort and went to work at a munitions depot outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The officer that she worked for found out that she could draw, and he asked her to do a series of pen and ink drawings of different aircraft that were coming in and out of the base at that time. So she did about 6 or 7 of these, and he liked them very much, and he framed them. And I think something went off in her mind where she realized that she could possibly make this as a way of supporting herself. At the same time, Pratt Institute, where my father was doing his refresher course, really went after recruiting female pupils, because most of the guys were off at war, so they needed enrollees. And so this officer encouraged her to apply, and she did, and she got accepted. So in the fall of 1944, she started her 3-year program. And then coincidentally, my father was having an art show at about 1946, 1947, and one of her roommates said, "Oh, we're going to see a show of this guy. His name is Lambo. Would you like to go?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I heard about him." And so she went, and they met at an art show. How appropriate. They got married in 1948. They had their first child, my oldest sister, in 1949. And then in 1950, they moved to Peekskill. And so we have some of my father's earlier Peekskill paintings here. These are from 1952. Consequently, they had 3 more children. I'm number 4. And my brother, who was here earlier, is number 2. And he was a freelance illustrator, and he was working specifically for a publisher in New York City, doing books, jackets, illustrations. And he would do paintings. They would go off on trips, often to Cape Cod, Maine, Nova Scotia. And he would go off and do his paintings, and then she would go off and do her painting. And sometimes she would say, I'm going to go off. And we'd say, "Oh, can we go with you?" And she would say, "Absolutely not. I need to get away from you kids for a little while. And we would see her out in the field painting somewhere, and we knew that we should not approach her because she would not be happy. She didn't want to be distracted. This is actually one of her earlier works from the 1960s. This is the church where we're at having the show right now. And they used to have a fair here in this late spring. It was called the Flea Market and Art Show. And she would get me to come down with some of her work, and I would watch. And I believe I sold that piece to one of our neighbors for $25. Then around 1970, my father's work started to dry up. And my mother was working in advertising. He didn't think that he could sell his paintings. He didn't think that there was a market for it. However, a lot of the towns around started to have these small art shows, like for Bedford Hills, Armonk was a big show. So my sister, actually, Susan, who's number 3, encouraged them to go to these shows. And my father was like, oh, I'm not going to go to that show. You're not going to sell anything. But my mother went. And she had the good fortune of being next to this other man, artist, who was doing selling amazingly well. And she said to my father, oh, you have to come see this guy. His work isn't that much better than yours, and he's selling like crazy. So my father went, and he became a quick study, and he started to do these shows himself, and he learned a few things. And let's go back to looking at his work. He decided that all the work had to be framed, because he said people want to get the piece of artwork and take it home and put it right up on their wall. And then he also said you need a big picture to draw them in. So this was actually one of the works he did late in life. It was one of his favorite pieces. He had a very high price on it because he really didn't want to sell it. And I'm so glad he didn't, because now I have it. And it's really beautiful. If we compare it to those Peekskill paintings which we showed earlier, those are very colorful. You know, they have a lot of color in them. And when he started doing the art shows in the 1970s, he very specifically decided to zero in on landscapes that were sort of muted in colors, not a lot of figures, and kind of historic at the time as well. So when he did this one in the 1990s, maybe 20 or 25 years later, it became much more colorful. He was bringing color back into his artwork. This one is also a painting of Brooklyn from the 1940s, 1946, I believe. And the one above it is the lions at the New York Public Library in New York City on Fifth Avenue. Interesting story about this. So when I was living in California, I would come back for a visit in the summer, and both of them would show me what they had been working on for the past year. He showed me this painting. Of course, I loved it. But I made a comment that the red of the coat had bled a little bit into the background. And he basically just kind of acknowledged what I had said, and that was that. 1 year later, I come back for another visit, and he's showing me his work again, and he pulls this one out of the box, and he said, here, James, I'm giving this to you. You caused me so much trouble over the past year. And I was like, why? What happened? He said, I've redone that painting 3 times. And I finally got it right. And then we looked at the new painting. It was actually a bit better than this one, not much, but a bit. He changed this to a steamship line, kind of like a cruise line. The colors were a little brighter, and the figures were a little bit more crisp. And of course, he sold it right away. But then I had this one. So then I said to my mom, well, gee, Mom, what are you going to give me? Dad gave me that one. And so we decided that she would give me something at Putnam Valley. My brother and I used to catch all of us actually, would catch the school bus here. My mom would always change things a little bit. So actually, there's a stream that runs down here, which she took out, and the road is a little bit straighter normally. But by and large, it's this is the shed that's right outside here at the church. My mom also, one of her signature things was to use white birches in her paintings. And you see them here also. And my dad, he had a particular painting style where he would show a snowing scene. Winter scenes were always very popular, but he could do he developed a technique to do a snowing scene, which would kind of depict a blizzard or a very heavy snowstorm. And those were very successful. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those to show today. But one time my mom said, oh, I think I'd like to do a snowing scene. And he said, well, then I think I'll do some white birches. And then they decided maybe not. She wouldn't do any snowing scenes and he wouldn't do any white birches. A lot of people have mentioned that he was technically a very good artist, maybe even a little bit more popular than my mom, but that my mom had a little bit more heart in her pieces. This one is one of my father's. This is actually a print of one that he did back in the late 1970s. This is the Wikipe Road where it intersects the Oscawana Heights Road in Putnam Valley. And that is a blacksmith shop which was there in the 1960s, but then has sort of fallen away, but the foundation is probably still there. As I pointed out, this was one that my mom did in the 1960s of this church, when it was a Methodist church. Even though we were raised Catholic, we spent more happy times at this church than we did at our Catholic church. Talking a little bit about my work now, this is a painting of the Croton-on-Hudson from one of the homes that I lived in at the time. The painting up here is of Fire Island Beach. I like to paint in oils, and I like to paint in a very graphic style. Our family home in Putnam Valley. I did this while I was living in California, just because I wanted to have a painting to go with the other one that my mom had given me, of where we grew up. Fun story about these little paintings is that Don went to a framer in Peekskill to buy some molding. And at the same time, this framer had all these odd lots of frames that he would, not the frames themselves, but just like pieces of frames that he was getting rid of. He was throwing out. They were in a big garbage pail. My father said, oh, can I have those? And the framer said, sure, take them, guy. I want to get rid of them. I can't use them because they were too small to really do anything with. So he had a table saw downstairs in the cellar, and he started to make all these little frames.
He made those frames.
Yes. And what's great is my father, before he would do any large paintings, he would always do a small painting first to kind of work out the color scheme and the composition. So he had all these things just saved up. He had like probably hundreds of them. And he said, oh, I could frame these. And he started to sell them, and they actually sold very well. We only have a few left within the family.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Is this from the property?
This is actually, yes, I believe this is on New Hill Road.
I bet, yeah.
As you're walking down towards the stream.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, thank you much for.
Yeah, I think we may